Okay, let's work on some limits at infinity. So if we take this first function, f of x equals 5 plus 1 over x plus 10 over x squared, and I encourage you to pull out your graphing calculator and just draw a sketch of this graph. And this function looks like that. So it looks like at the ends it's leveling off. Over here near negative infinity, and on the right hand side near positive infinity. And so what we need to figure out is what y value is that function leveling off at. So if we think about what happens to this function as x gets really large in both the positive and negative directions. So limit as x goes to infinity. So if x gets really large and positive, then these two terms that have x in the denominator are going to go to 0. So this limit is just going to be 5. The exact same thing is going to happen at negative infinity, because these two terms are still just going to go to 0. The denominator gets bigger and bigger, and so the entire term gets smaller and smaller. So this second limit will also be 5. So what we know about this function is that it has a horizontal asymptote at y equals 5. Okay, so let's try to do a similar analysis for negative 3e to the negative x. So what you want to think about is what happens when you plug in really large positive numbers for x. So if you were to plug like 1,000 in here for x, or 2,000, or 1,000,000, what would happen? Well, what we know is that this term keeps getting smaller and smaller, because a negative exponent means move it to the denominator. So this term is going to go to 0, which is going to send this whole limit to 0. So when we look at the graph of this function, it should be leveling off over here on the right-hand side near y equals 0. In other words, when you talk about this function here as x goes to negative infinity, so you're plugging in like negative 1,000, negative 2,000, and what happens is this exponent becomes positive. So now these numbers are really big, but they're really big and negative. So it's going to be down here below the x-axis. So maybe the graph looks like this. Maybe this first part that we drew is on the wrong side. It's leveling off near 0. It's just coming up from the bottom. So what we can do to check is just put that in our graphing calculator. Negative 3e to the negative x. And you should get a picture that looks something like what we have here. So what we would say is that there's a horizontal asymptote at y equals 0, and the end behavior on the right is this horizontal asymptote, and on the left it's sort of falling. The y values go to negative infinity. So this limit is going to be negative infinity, or does not exist. So we shouldn't say equals negative infinity. Maybe we just say heads towards negative infinity.